I move second reading of Bill 55, entitled "A Act to Amend Various Acts with Respect to the Disclosure of Confidential Information," and that now be read for the second time.
Mr. Crawford has moved second reading of Bill 55, an act to amend various acts with respect to the disclosure of confidential information. Pursuant to Standing Order 98, the member has 12 minutes for his presentation. And I recognize the member for Oakville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be here today and speak to the House and about Bill 55. I think it's very, very important. I'm proud to be able to rise in this House today and speak to the second reading of my first private member's bills that I have presented, entitled the Safeguarding Our Information Act 2018. The need for consumer protection transcends riding and partisan boundaries. All Ontarians deserve to be thoroughly protected by a common-sense consumer protection law. They should be able to trust that their consent will be obtained prior to the disclosure of sensitive personal information to government institutions. Strengthening consumer protection law, as this law proposes to do, is one way in which I am delivering on my commitment to the people of Oakville to work hard as a representative here in this Assembly. In today's digital age, Ontarians are increasingly embracing digital banking options, such as shopping online and through apps. They're also using credit and debit cards much more frequently by tapping or swiping to pay for everyday items. Consumers who enter credit agreements unavoidably disclose sensitive personal information like credit history and data. Robust consumer protection laws are critical to protect consumers from unacceptable breaches of their privacy, and our privacy laws must be updated in order to enhance and safeguard Ontarians' personal information.
Hear, hear.
That's why I introduced Bill 55, the Safeguarding Our Information Act 2018, to take meaningful action to protect Ontario consumers and their sensitive personal information. If passed, this Act will prevent government institutions from obtaining personal information from Ontarians without their consent. The Act will also amend the following Ontario statutes: the Consumer Protection Act, the Consumer Reporting Act, and the Credit Union and Caisse Populaire Act. These changes will prevent government institutions from disclosing consumers' personal information unless consent is expressly given by the consumer. Statistics Canada has in recent months sent compel letters to some financial institutions soliciting the financial data and personal information of thousands of Canadian households. The Chief Statistician of Canada has argued that Stats Canada has to have this access and this data. However, Mr. Speaker, on November 8, 2018, before the Standing Senate Committee on Banking, Trade and Commerce, Mr. Neil Parameter, President of the Canadian Bankers Association, told senators that, quote, all options are on the table when asked about possible legal actions against the federal government. He later stated, quote, the central concern is this very new and unprecedented request. Banks have never been asked to provide personal client information to Statistics Canada before, so that's why there is such concern from the industry. And we, quote, have been clear that we have serious concerns over the privacy implications of the StatsCan transaction-level data request. In addition, I have listened to feedback from the credit unions and the Canadian Credit Union Association. These organizations, representing many thousands of Ontarians, have indicated their strong support for this bill and its firm protection for credit union members from personal information disclosure requests from government institutions without consumer consent. I am very glad and I was honoured that Mr. Kelly McGiffin, the CEO of the First Ontario Credit Union, attended my recent public announcement of Bill 55 and offered remarks on behalf of more than 135,000 members that belong to his credit union.
Very nice.
He stated, and I quote, my first duty as CEO of First Ontario Credit Union is to do the right things for our members. Legislation to give members a say in who can access their information is doing what is right for our members. Thus, industry stakeholders, banks and credit unions alike support protecting and respecting consumers. preventing overreach on the part of federal government institutions trying to obtain personal information from consumers without their consent. The Federal Privacy Commissioner also agrees, Mr. Speaker. Giving testimony before the same Senate Committee on Banking, Federal Privacy Commissioner Mr. Daniel Therion stated, quote, that I think we are all struck in the recent news by the amount of data being requested from StatsCan from a large number of dwellings in a very detailed way. What is raising a lot of concern currently is what I call the scale, the breadth, and the scope of the information that is being sought. He also confirmed that the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada has received complaints about StatsCan and its collection of personal information from private sector organizations without any consent. In our everyday changing digital world, we need to enhance protections for consumers and take into context the changes in our society. By passing this bill, we can implement the safeguards needed to protect Ontarians and give all Ontarians the ability to say no to their data being collected by federal government agencies without their consent. According to a recent Nanos research survey of Canadians, 75% of Canadians opposed Statistics Canada accessing personal records without consent. The study also found that 57% of respondents would never consent to giving their personal financial data shared to Statistics Canada if given the opportunity. Mr. Speaker, Statistics Canada has asked to access the sensitive personal information of over 500,000 Canadians from across the country. Ontario represents approximately 40% of our national population, and therefore, in proportional terms, represents approximately 180,000 Ontarians that could be impacted by this decision. Mr. Speaker, this means that the personal, private data and banking and credit information of approximately 200,000 people, unsuspecting Oakville residents, will otherwise be obtained by the federal government without their consent. My obligation is to protect the people of Oakville and the people of Ontario. Ontarians understand the significance of this unprecedented breach of privacy. Speaking in the House of Commons on October 30th, 2018, the Honourable Lisa Raitt, Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada and official opposition, stated, quote, StatsCan has written the country's 9 largest financial institutions and demanded that they hand over millions and millions of financial transactions from hundreds of thousands of Canadians. And if it were not for a global news report, Canadians would never know that the government was this far into their personal information. They now know, and they are appalled.
Wow.
Mr. Speaker, I have listened to the constituents and the consumers from Oakville and across this province who are asking for stronger consumer privacy protection law. In the absence of federal action, this Act will update and enhance protection for consumers and prevent government institutions from obtaining personal information from Ontarians without their consent. The bill has been written to address these concerns and update the Consumer Protection Act, the Consumer Reporting Act, and the Credit Unions in Casse Populaire Act. Our government was elected to deliver on a plan for the people of Ontario to make Ontario a better place to live, work, and raise a family. This will contribute to that. We also made a commitment to restore accountability and trust in Ontario's government and take a new approach, one which respects all the hard work for the people of Ontario. Strengthening consumer protection, as this bill proposes to do, aligns with our commitment of responsible government and correcting overreach on the part of government in everyday lives. Gaining trust and confidence of Ontarians is critical, and as such, it is appropriate to emphasize the central importance of protecting the consumers in their privacy of their financial data. Mr. Speaker, there have been several reports of data breaches and data integrity issues at institutions around the world recently. Most notably, Facebook has faced intense criticism in its inability to prevent unauthorized use of users' data by firms such as Cambridge Analytica. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg was called to appear before the U.S. Senate Commerce, and Judiciary Committees to justify his company's actions with respect to privacy, data mining regulations, and Cambridge Analytica. This matter came to prominence in the United States during the aftermath of its most recent general election and the use of targeted campaign advertisements. Consumers and advocates were very concerned by what has, in their view, been a violation of the terms of agreement which stipulated that the data Facebook offers for academic purposes may not be sold, brokered, or used for advertising purposes. Mr. Zuckerberg was called to appear in front of a committee in the UK made up of lawmakers from 9 countries, including the US, UK, and Canada. This was a wake-up call for the world. Personal data is sensitive, and consumer demand protection needs to be strengthened. This bill will enhance that protection. Financial data is especially vulnerable to hacking. In the past 10 years, the number of attacks has increased greatly, including in 2014, a data breach which impacted Home Depot, and in 2017, Equifax was impacted as well by a data breach. In both these cases, millions of people had their sensitive data stolen, data that included social insurance numbers, addresses, and credit card information. Bill 55 will protect consumers by giving them the option to opt out of this disclosure of personal information. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, my professional experience is in the financial industry where I helped build 2 asset management companies. I and my colleagues were in a position of trust, investing on behalf and for the benefit of our clients, and we took our responsibilities and fiduciary responsibility very seriously. I understand the need for thorough compliance oversight and security of sensitive personal data. It's unfortunate the federal government does not view privacy through the same lens that industry and the overwhelming majority of consumers do. Madam Speaker, through this legislation, we will amend Ontario statutes. This debate transcends provincial boundaries and political partisanship. Investor confidence is low in this country. We need to regain investor confidence. Foreign investment is down dramatically in Canada over the last 10 years. We need to have strong investor protection, consumer protection in this province and country so people are confident to reinvest in this country. Madam Speaker, I encourage all members of this legislature to engage in robust and thoughtful debate, and I look forward to hearing from my legislative colleagues and their thoughts on this bill. Thank you very much.